Well, if we're ready, we'll get started and welcome everyone to our GOH Travel presentation from Jeffrey Parnell. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone that applications for the 2019 GOH Travel Scholarship are now being accepted, and the deadline to submit is September 30th. Application materials are available on the internet, and to be eligible, you must have worked at HBG for 2 years by December 1st of this year. The jury is scheduled to deliberate this fall, and the 2019 winner will be announced at our holiday party in December. So word to the wise, if you haven't started your application yet, let tonight's experience inspire you to get going on it. I would like to thank the team that puts this all together every year for us. Morgan Street Matter, Lindsay Gray, Jennifer Archiato, John Klettner, Patty Sprecco out in San Diego, and Terry Struminger and Tamara Goff. There are a lot of moving parts that happen behind the scenes with this program that most of us don't even realize, so thanks to this team for all of their efforts and making this experience happen. With that, let's turn our attention to the highlight of the GOH Travel Program, tonight's featured presentation. Many of you know that when we began the GOH Travel Scholarship Program, we sought to create a way for current and future HBG employees to connect with the legacy of our founding partners even long after they have left. Unfortunately, Greg Nedak can't be here tonight, but he sends his best wishes and said he will catch up with us next year. As we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the firm this year, it is especially inspiring to me that our founders' personal legacies live on through the special programs we've established in both their names. Greg's love of learning through travel prompted the creation of the GOH Travel Scholarship, and we hope that what you experience tonight will connect each of you with his legacy and passion for travel. Over the last 5 years, we've had 6 scholarship recipients who have together traveled over 65,000 miles across 3 continents. And I'd like to ask all of our GOH Travel winners to stand. Thor, Emily, Deidre, and Anthea. And they have all had their great travel experiences already, and maybe they're rolling around for another application. We learned so much through your journeys, and now, Jeffrey, it's your turn to invite us all into a new conversation as you share why and how God is in the details from your travels through Rome and Barcelona. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Jeffrey to start it up.
Thank you, Mark. No problem. Before we get started, I have several people to thank. First of all, HBG for allowing me to take this trip and have this amazing experience in the legacy of Gregory Nedak. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm reliving it every day. I'd also like to thank Deidre Brady, Fran Espin, and Rob Bierbergs for giving me constructive criticisms during the proposal process. I don't think I'd be standing up here today without their comments. These two need a lot of thanking as well. Walker, who's here today, and my daughter Sydney had to leave these two behind, unfortunately, for 2 whole weeks, which was probably the toughest thing I've ever done as a father. And I'd like to thank my parents as well, who are here tonight, for helping take care of them while we were gone, as well as Brittany's mom, aunt, and cousin, who all pitched in. And when you're gone for so long, especially with such young children, you miss things. You miss school pickup. You miss just talking to them at the end of the night. And a lot of times you miss big developmental milestones, like your daughter's 4 steps. So we watched that video, I think, just about every day, maybe 5 or 10 times a day. I think we got it the second day we were in Rome. But and also, of course, my lovely wife, Brittany, thank you for allowing me to share this experience with you and spending every second of every day with me. Thank you. Now, God is in the details. What does this mean? Now, Mies van der Rohe coined the phrase years and years ago, and it's obviously open to interpretation. But to me, it has two meanings. One, our profession demands a religious-like fervor. You have to have passion. You have to care about what you do from start to finish, from design concept to completion of the project. You really have to have that passion about your project. And second, the craftsmanship, the way the space is built can create a religious-like impact on the person perceiving it, the person who's using your space. And I think you'll see as the presentation goes on that I was definitely impacted in that way. Our trip started in New York. We landed in New York around lunchtime, and we didn't have a flight out until midnight, so we had a little time to bop around. Arrived in Rome the next day, checked into the second hotel 2 days after, and then after a full week in Rome, we went to Barcelona and spent a little less than a week there and arrived back in Memphis. We'll spend as much time proportionally in New York as we did on the trip, so don't worry. We'll get through this quickly. We had about 6 hours to hang out and enjoy the city, but one thing I definitely wanted to check out while we were in New York was St. Patrick's Cathedral. It was a nice introduction to my travels. This Gothic revival church was really, it's like a preview for me, right? St. Patrick's is the largest Gothic revival cathedral in the United States. The construction spanned from 1858 to 1888. And it's just a beautiful space. It's a phenomenal American piece of architecture, but it's really just the beginning of the trip. We're just dipping our toes into seeing some beautiful works of art here. The stained glass, the wood scroll work, all these stone ornaments were very natural in feel, and everything tied together and fit nicely. We even stumbled upon a version of the Pieta, a depiction of Mary lamenting over her son's death. This version was sculpted by William Partridge in the late 1790s. It's a beautiful piece of art, but we'll compare it to something in the future. So finally, after several hours of flying and a bit of an exhausting trip, we had made it to Rome. In Rome, I had the opportunity to observe a variety of religious structures and other places of gathering from the range of classical to modern era design concepts. And given the rich historical significance of Roman architecture, I really had the chance to see, a Renaissance building, a Baroque building, a modern building, classical building, all in one location. It was a perfect spot for this particular thesis. The train ride from the airport into Rome, I was wondering what I'd gotten myself into at this point. This isn't the postcard Rome that I was expecting. A lot of overgrown grass and prefab concrete buildings. I was a bit concerned, to say the least. But after a bit of a train ride that was half asleep for, we had finally made it. Our first hotel wasn't really a hotel, it was a monastery. We stayed at Santa Francesca Romana for 2 nights, and it was a great space. It was very subtle and understated. It was this little alleyway in Trastevere, and it was this perfect, quaint little neighborhood. There was no major details to speak of. It was just a very plain stucco building with this nice arched entryway. And walking through, the building has an irregular floor plan. None of the stairs stack on top of each other. So every time we went up a floor, and we're on the 4th floor, we're having to cross these shrines. And so my wife's Catholic, and so every time we're crossing one of these rooms, she's stopping, bowing, and doing the cross sign. There are these really weird prints all over the walls and the hallways that looked like they were trying to depict some sort of a religious story, but I couldn't really place them. They looked strange and out of place. Our room was small. To say the least, it was adequate, but it had a really great feel. It was perfect for what we needed on that first few nights. Now this is the Noli map of Rome. A lot of you architecture people should obviously have seen this before, and it gives a context of where we're going to be staying and what we're going to go see. The red outline there is the neighborhood of Trastevere, and you can see we've highlighted the hotels we stayed at, as well as the major sites we'll be seeing while we're there. Trastevere was a great neighborhood. I really enjoyed my time there, and even when we changed hotels to outside that neighborhood, we found ourselves going back time and time again. On our first full day in Rome, the first thing we did was have a guided tour of the Vatican. We saw the Vatican Museum, Sistine Chapel, and St. Peter's Basilica. Our guide's name was Laura, so if you see someone holding a pink flag in the pictures coming up, that's her. And she was a great leader and kind of helped us wade through the crowds of thousands of other tourists. The tour started in the Pigna Courtyard. It's this lovely outdoor space filled with these monuments and details and reliefs of papal authority. The most obvious of which is this 14-foot bronze pine cone that just has this beautiful coloring to it, as well as the sign of the papal authority itself, the shield with the two keys, one gold, one silver, and the ties that binding them. So these are the keys to the kingdom of heaven and kingdom of earth, respectively, as well as some family crests here with the three hills and the starburst is the sign of Pope Alexander, and you'll see these signs and more all over our journey. Also in the Pigna Courtyard is a sculpture called the Sphere Within a Sphere. I thought this was an amazing work of art, personally. This bronze 13-foot diameter sphere, which had this cool rotating feature to it, it was cracked open and had another sphere inside it. The sphere on the interior side is said to represent the kingdom of earth, and the sphere on the outside, it represents Christianity, and the cracked openness and the cogs, the inner working of it, is the fragility of life. So it was a cool piece to start with. After that, we made our way into the Vatican Museum itself, and I was immediately impressed by two things. One, the opulence of the space, and two, the amount of people that we were sardine canned in there with. It was packed. Rome sees 5 million visitors, the Vatican sees 5 million visitors a year, averaging about 13,000 each day, and we were there in June during peak season, so it was cramped, to say the least, but we made the best of it. There were times when we were just exhausted and didn't even want to deal with it anymore, but it was still absolutely a beautiful space. So each passageway we walked through, each door was grander. The ceilings have these wonderful frescoes. Some of them mimic reliefs. You see more signs of papal authority, more family crests, in this case, bees, which is the sign of the Barberini family, which again, you can see all over Rome. And also biblical depictions. This time, Jesus is upright and moving around, which is nice because we saw so many scenes of the passion of him dead or dying or in pain. So it was nice to see him actually moving around for a change. And the floors of this building are magnificent. Every other room is more beautiful than the last, and these floors are hundreds of years old, if not older. And it's just, yeah, you can take a picture of walls and frescoes and everything, but the tile and terrazzo and the stone floors were phenomenal, and you have no idea how hard it was to take clean pictures of these floors with all the people in there. And one more thing, you're walking the same floors as Michelangelo and Raphael and how many hundreds of world leaders over the time who have been to the Vatican. The room in the Vatican Museum that stuck out most to me are called the Raphael rooms. So it's a series of rooms. They make up the entry to the papal apartments. Pope Francis actually doesn't stay in the papal apartments. He has a much more quaint house in the Vatican, and he vacations in the summer. So this was a beautiful space. Frescoes, mosaics, beautifully crafted doors. We don't get this level of craftsmanship anymore. I don't think we really ever will. And obviously the most famous of all of Raphael's frescoes in this area is the School of Athens. Scene Raphael depicts the greatest Greek and Roman philosophers, scientists, and artists all in one scene. Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great, Socrates, Pythagoras, Michelangelo, and Raphael even worked himself in on the far right there. And we'd finally, after wading through crowds and crowds of people, a brief intermission, we had made it to the Sistine Chapel. I've been wanting to see this for quite a while. I was a big fan of Michelangelo when I began studying art and architecture in college, so it was a great experience to have finally made it to this space. Now, the Sistine Chapel ceiling tells the story of Genesis, the creation of the heavens and the earth, Adam and Eve, and then the story of Noah. And Michelangelo famously frescoed the entire thing. And what's interesting is he was not a painter. He was a master sculptor, but he was not by any means a master painter. And he was learning on the job. He was also doing this difficult task hanging hundreds of feet up in the air in the scaffold horizontally, and probably hated every minute of it. But you can see he worked backwards. So he started it with the stories of Noah and worked his way to the end of the hallway. So in the depictions of Noah's Ark, you've got these figures that are not very well defined. He hasn't figured out how to shadow everything properly, it looks like. And by the time you get to the creation of man, he's really kind of got his technique down. And obviously, the Last Judgment at the end of the altar here is a beautiful fresco, again, by Michelangelo. And the weird thing about frescoes, not weird, but rather part of the craft of it, is once you start, you can't stop, or you got to start over. It's he has this whole entire wall depicting the scene of the Last Judgment, of Jesus casting down the wicked and saving those who the true believers. And for such an eerie subject matter, it's very bright and vivid, and it's a bit odd choice considering what we're depicting here. And finally, what I really wanted to see at the Vatican was St. Peter's Basilica, an absolutely beautiful Renaissance and Baroque work of architecture. It's the amalgamation of four architects: Bramante, Michelangelo, Maderno, and Bernini. This is high Renaissance architecture, and it's very institutional. It's very government-like, right? And that's because it is the government of the Catholic Church. And walking inside, before you even get into the nave and the atrium, you start to get dwarfed by the space. And there's these beautiful, bronze-clad doors depicting the sins of man and Jesus' redemption, and more signs of papal authority. You can see the Barberini bees once again worked into the doors, as well as several other papal crests. And upon entering, turn right, you immediately see Michelangelo's Pieta, masterful work of art, beautiful sculpture. He completed this at the age of 24. When I was 24, I was struggling to make paper models in architecture school, so it made me feel real good about that. And it's really not fair to compare these two sculptures, but we're going to do it anyway. I mean, Michelangelo's obviously looks like it was carved from butter, but it's a little more flowy. It's a little more. It's so realistic, it's not, right? There's too many folds in the fabric, whereas in the other one, it's more somber. And you also have an age discrepancy with the age of Mary. Michelangelo's Mary is about 30, while the other's is 50, which is a little more appropriate for the time of Jesus' death. And after viewing the Pieta, we walk through and view St. Peter's itself, and you're just dwarfed by the majesty and the scale of this building. It's absolutely phenomenal. I had to compose myself, I had to take a moment before really moving through the space. What is really interesting is how the details and the ornamentation and all the craft breaks down the space. If you can imagine this giant basilica was just a bare, blank, white space, you'd feel really dwarfed. But with all these carvings and emblems and engravings, it really helps you break it down. You can even see the structure move through the dome and through the columns. Another interesting work of art here is a depiction of St. Peter. Apparently, one of the things to do here is as pilgrims come by and either rub or kiss his feet, and it's gotten to the point where this bronze sculpture has been rubbed down bare and smoothed his feet out. We didn't kiss his feet; we just rubbed them there. Some people did. It was gross. Then we made our way up to the dome. And again, you're just impressed by the scale of this building. Looking down, people literally look like ants. You're hundreds of feet up in the air, and you turn around, you have 10 or 12 foot tall mosaics that are visible from the ground. It's completely impressive. And these mosaics are huge. I'm talking about the stones, not just the art pieces themselves. And we ventured up the cupola from there, 491 steps going up this very tiny alleyway of a staircase. Eventually, it felt like we were leaning over 45 degrees to get to the top, but you have these spectacular sweeping views of the city and St. Peter's Square, which is one of the best views I've ever seen. That night, we checked out Lungo El Tevere. Lungo El Tevere is a summer festival in Rome. It starts in June, goes all the way through the end of August, and it translates to along the Tiber. I was expecting like a music fest or like a Italian fest or something like that. It was not that crowded. It had just started, and after asking around with some people there, they said, yeah, it it's very long. It stretches over a very long portion of the Tiber. It's not concentric, so it wasn't as crowded as I thought it would be. And there was some very interesting art installations and some great restaurants. And Brittany and I had this rule that we weren't going to go to a restaurant that wasn't busy. So we found a very busy restaurant and sat down, and were surprised to find ourselves an American eatery with a Nintendo theme to it. So for our first dinner, or our second dinner rather, we were having burgers and French fries in Rome, which was, I don't know what that is. The next day, we went to the Pantheon, and we approached it from the south, which is the back side of the building. And again, I'm thinking, it's too late. This building's gone. It's this cobbled together ruin. I'm too late. I've missed it. But then once you round up to the front, you really get a sense for it. This beautiful portico. It's weathered, and things are starting to go away, sure, but it's majestic. And then you walk inside. Oh, I'm sorry, not yet. Now you walk inside, and one, you're dwarfed by the scale, and if you're me, you stop and weep a little bit because you finally made it to a site you've been trying to go to for years and years on end. But after watching the light move about the space and composing myself a little bit, finally started to take some pictures and realize what's going on with the space. The detail is amazing. This building is 2,000 years old, and it still has these amazing Corinthian columns and just some of the best craftsmanship and artistry I've ever seen in a space. And again, you'll see signs of the papal authority. This used to be a pagan monument, now turned Christian cathedral. And you can see here on the picture on the right, the coffers are a little bit exaggerated. That gives you a really interesting perspective. It makes the dome feel bigger than it is. The dome is massive, and it's an engineering marvel. It's one of the first instances of unreinforced concrete that we know in Western architecture. And it's kind of amazing that this dome has never collapsed either. And after that, we did some touristy things, right? You have to go to Trevi and throw a coin in. You go to the Spanish Steps, and this is actually a really great shopping district. Go into the stores with the things you know you can afford, like Hermes, Gucci, those sorts of places. You might buy a shirt if you're like me, not at those stores, but others. And that night, we checked into our new hotel. We went to Arenula Suites, which is a boutique 5-room hotel sent to this apartment complex. And it's an immediate contrast to where we were just staying. The entryway had this very interesting sculpture right in the center courtyard. There's these beautiful mosaic floors and some really cool arcade features. And the space is completely different from what we had experienced. Just one corridor, very easy to get around. You're not getting lost in winding staircases, and your room is much bigger, and the shower you can actually stand in without squatting. And that night we met a friend. This is the point in the story I'd like to introduce you to our friend Martina. Martina was an Italian foreign exchange student who stayed with Brittany's family for 2 years while she finished high school. And when she found out we were going to Rome, she decided to have a holiday and came down and met us. We had dinner at this restaurant called Da Enzo in Trastevere, and it was a wonderful meal. And it was interesting because we got there early, we were waiting on our guests, and we're getting these weird looks from the waiters because there's a line going out the door for other people waiting to get their seats. But once our guests came and they found out they were Italian, it was like, no problem. No more American tourists ruining our restaurant. The next day, we went to St. Peter's Square again and took part of the papal audience. We got there about 6:30 in the morning, and the Pope didn't emerge until about 10:30. It was 90 degrees outside, and we're sweating with all these other wonderful people. But it was an amazing experience. And then, finally, he makes his way out. We were really close. A tip for anyone who decides to go to a papal audience: if you don't get up front, get to one of the aisles, you'll be able to touch him. Basically, if you're on an aisle, we probably could have thrown something at him if we wanted to and hit him, but it was still amazing. It was a great experience. Later that afternoon, we walked around Rome a little more, and we made our way to the Vittoriano, which is a monument to the Italian military. It's the kind of waving the flag a little bit and celebrating a united country. And again, this building dwarfs you in size. With the Pantheon and with St. Peter's, you're dwarfed in the presence of God. Here, you're dwarfed in the presence of state. It's very militaristic. It was completed. It began before World War I, but it was completed under Mussolini. So you can see the militarism in the architecture and the art, but it doesn't make it any less of a fabulous and beautiful space. I particularly loved the coffered arches here. They were gorgeous. And that afternoon, we walked and checked out the Colosseum. Again, you're in Rome, you got to do the Rome things. You have to go check out the big monuments. We did not go inside. We didn't do a tour. We didn't pre-book anything, and I didn't feel like waiting in line out in the hot sun again. Our experience with the Colosseum was a culinary one. We had reservations at a restaurant called Aroma. It sits on the 4th or 5th floor of an apartment building. It's a Michelin star restaurant. It was an absolutely amazing experience. We got to sit there and watch the sunset over the Colosseum, and the whole entire time Brittany and I are looking at each other just thinking, is this real life? Are we here? And can we afford this place? It was expensive, but it was worth every penny. It was an amazing culinary experience. After sleeping in the next day and trying not to think about how much I had just spent on dinner, we made our way over to Villa Borghese. Villa Borghese is interesting. The Borgheses were a very wealthy family in ancient Rome, and they decided to build a house with its own grounds to house their art collection. So nobody lived here. This just had their art. You do what rich people do, right? It's an absolutely majestic space. It's a work of art from floor to ceiling, from the tiled or stone floors to the frescoes on the ceiling. Every time you turn around, you're in front of a beautiful work of art. And I could go on all day about all the pieces we saw, but we'll really just look at two. Apollo and Daphne on your left and David on your right were beautiful sculptures by Bernini. And again, I do not understand how these ancient Renaissance artists were able to capture these sort of scenes with movement and do it so perfectly with a material like marble and make it look like butter. I have no earthly idea how that happened. And after a while, after exiting the gallery, we walked the grounds, and it's a beautiful outdoor park space with its own equestrian track, aviary, and beautiful buildings, and actually a second museum as well. The next day, we went to go check out the Lateran University Library, but we were turned away, unfortunately. So we ended up having a bit of a change of plans, and we went to Santa Maria della Vittoriano. And the facade is very deceiving because it's very simple, but then you walk inside and you have this beautiful, majestic space with all these frescoes, this gilded woodwork, and this massive organ, and these beautiful sculpture pieces high up in the ceiling, and this dome and cupola that are crafted as well. Just beautiful piece of work of art and architecture. But what we really wanted to see was this sculpture, is the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. Again, a beautiful work of art by Bernini, and it depicts the scene that Saint Teresa felt the love of God go through her, and it's, according to Saint Teresa herself, was the most pleasurable and agonizing feeling she's ever felt. That afternoon, we went on a journey. So we got on the metro and had a stop in a little town called Mirti. Clearly, we were outside the walls at this point. This neighborhood was thoroughly working class. I had never felt this uncomfortable in a place outside of my own city. I don't know if there's a sanitation strike or what, but there's trash everywhere. It was a weird journey. But GPS was like, yeah, just walk east and just keep going. You'll get to a field. You'll cut through the field, and then you'll be there. We had to walk 30 minutes around because the entryway into the field we were supposed to cross was blocked. So we spent a lot longer trying to get to the church than we meant. And also, we're surrounded by this tall grass that looks like wheat, and it was a weird experience. Just to say the least. And then we finally started seeing signs of life after a while. We could see the church off in the distance, and we knew we weren't going to get mugged once we had seen people walking around in what actually looks like a city again. And then we made it. Jubilee Church, a work by Richard Meyer, finished in 2003. It's a far cry from any of the other churches we had seen so far. Obviously, a beautiful piece of modern architecture. It has these three curved shells that emerge from the ground, and they mimic the basilicas that we've already seen, the flying buttresses. Everything is stripped down to its basic principle. Your bell tower is just that. It's a tower with bells. There's nothing intricate about this. There's no rose windows. There's no arched portals. just beautiful, clean spaces. And contrasting the holy door we saw at St. Peter's as well, you've just got this clean, smooth wood door that's flushed perfectly into the stone around it. And the eye is drawn upward, and the space isn't as big as any of the other cathedrals we've seen, but you look up because you're seeing the skylight. You got vertical wood elements drawing your eye up. And again, everything is simple and as bare bones as possible. Even the Stations of the Cross are just these prints that looked like they were, glued onto the wall. And also this very interesting reveal on the last outer shell that I thought was a nice touch as well. And again, just some more photos. And contrasting the organ we had saw at Santa Maria, just simple. What do you need? We need a place to house the organ. That's all it is. It's just bare bones and as simple as you can get it. And finally, we reached the end of our journey in Rome, and we had our last night in Rome. We went to see a symphony. So we went to Parco della Musica, which is a beautiful event space. It has 4 venues. There's the amphitheater and then 3 indoor theaters. And I really wanted to check out the outdoor theater, but it was closed off. They were preparing for the Summer Roma Festival, which I wanted to participate in, but obviously the timing of the window didn't work out. And one little thing that stuck out to me was this blue neon sign hanging over the concourse. Events take time, events take place, events take space, which I think is a wonderful programming statement for any event center. And the symphony we saw was Beethoven's 4th and 7th, conducted by Gustavo Dudamel. The auditorium has these beautiful folding wood acoustic panels and this kind of uneven brickwork along the walls. Apparently uneven bricks provide an additional acoustic support, but it was a great evening. I've never been to a symphony before. The energy of this conductor was amazing, and the show was phenomenal. And before we leave Rome, I can't help but talk about the food. Sure, we've already talked about 2 restaurants, but pretty much everything else was pizza and pasta, and every meal we had was better than the last. And I can't name any of these places because I'll forget them if I even try or mispronounce them. So we'll move forward. And then going out at night in Rome, walking around, you get to see these monuments you've already seen, but you see them in a whole new light because they're, the way they're lit up. It's beautiful. It's very romantic and a fantastic place. We didn't want to leave Rome at all. I didn't even have time to tell you about all these little hidden moments that we had. Every time you walk around, you find yourself in a beautiful square, or you walk up a hill and you turn around and you've got this beautiful view. Or maybe you're just walking to the next site you see an open door, you walk in and it's a gorgeous, beautiful cathedral that you weren't expecting and weren't planning on seeing at all. I didn't want to leave until we got to Barcelona. Like Rome, Barcelona is a traditionally Catholic city with a variety of beautiful and historic buildings, but unlike Rome, its architectural golden age is much more modern. Architects like Gaudí and Mies van der Rohe made their mark here, and their predecessors followed and not copied their style, but paid homage to it. And you can see the plan is much different from Rome's. Rome was this winding maze of cobblestone streets, and Barcelona is on a very set grid with a couple of axes cutting through it. It was very easy to get around, very walkable. And the ride in from the bus coming from the airport, you can tell it's a lot different from Rome. No overgrown fields. You've got this beautiful cityscape with these chamfered corners at every intersection. And what the chamfered corners did, they let you see. So as a pedestrian, if you're rounding a building, you don't have to worry about a car hitting you. You can see it before it's coming. Same thing if you're driving, you can see the people coming. You don't have to worry about coming to a stop and worrying you're going to hit somebody. We had a bit of a stressful journey, so we took a tram to the train in Trastevere, nearly got pickpocketed on the train platform, train to the airport, 3-hour flight or whatever it was, and then a bus ride in from the airport in Barcelona. We were exhausted by the end of it, and all that stress and exhaustion melted away when we got to our final hotel, Hotel 1898. It's a luxury hotel that is in this historic spice mine, or spice warehouse rather, and it's by far the best hotel I've ever been to. The check-in process We got in, we're exhausted, we're just ready to put our stuff down. And they said, "Oh, well, sir, Mr. Parnell, we've upgraded you to a deluxe king. And by the way, here's a complimentary spa night. And would you like a free bottle of champagne?" Yes, to all three of those things. Thank you. So all the stress just melted away as soon as we got in. Our first night, we obviously just wanted to take it easy, so we went up to the roof. They have a beautiful terrace up there. We watched the sunset. We had a glass of wine and a small meal. But the views of the city from the roof terrace were phenomenal. It was really hard to pry ourselves away from this hotel because it was such an amazing place. And it was really hard to pry us away once we got to the spa and checked out that space. As I said, it was in an old spice warehouse in the basement. I guess where they used to hold all the spices, they converted into the spa. You've got this beautifully heated pool. You've got a steam room, sauna, gym, everything you could need. So the next day we set out. We hit La Rambla. We walked to the pier and we walked down the beach, and we just were marveling at the architecture. You've got these historic Catalina Modernista, works of architecture next to these thoroughly modern pieces as well, and it's a beautiful city. We finally made our way to El Peixe, which is an architectural sculptural piece by Frank Gehry. It was finished in 1992 for the Olympics, and since has been left as a bit of a monument in front of a couple of skyscrapers. It's a beautiful work of art. These gilded stainless steel strips kind of interweave together, and often in the distance they look like the fish scales moving as this thing seems to just swimming down the skyline. After that, we went to La Boqueria. La Boqueria is an open marketplace where you can get pretty much anything you'd ever want: meats, fruits, dinner, lunch. We ended up eating lunch here at least 4 or 5 times. And the atmosphere is unlike any grocery store you could ever want to. Every stall has its own colors, its own smells, its own sounds, delicious desserts, great food, beautiful sights. The video just really doesn't do it justice, but it's an absolutely amazing experience. That night we had tickets for yet another show. As we made our way to the venue, we found ourselves in the square with the Barcelona Cathedral. And it turns out that Barcelona has more than one beautiful cathedral. This Gothic work of architecture, it's in the middle of a square, and you can definitely just check out this amazing works of art all up and down the walls, the arches. Everything is masterfully crafted. And we wanted to go inside, but we were unfortunately again turned away. But the square itself was filled with buskers, an open marketplace, art installations. People were plying their craft, trying to get you to buy something or trying to maybe scam you a little bit. But it was a great experience nonetheless. And then we had finally made our way to the Palace of Catalan Music. This building was phenomenal. I don't know another way to put it. The masonry facade with mosaics worked into it, and this great detail. You can see it here on the exterior, but again on the interior, the balustrades of this twisted marble work of art. And then, as if that wasn't beautiful enough, they took a colored glass and encapsulated that balustrade. Mosaics, coffered ceilings. It was gorgeous. Then you go inside the auditorium, and there's this beautiful reverse dome stained glass element. I thought I was going to be distracted by it the entire concert. It's a fabulous work of art with these warm colors in the center and cool colors on the exterior, mimicking the sun. But the concert itself was phenomenal. We saw a traditional Spanish and flamenco performance. It was great. I really don't know any way else to put it. So the next day, I had this great idea that we would walk from our hotel to Park Güell. GPS said 45-minute walk. I was like, yeah, no big deal. We've done that every day. It's fine. So we started down Passage de Gracia. And Barcelona has this beautiful aesthetic of this hexagonal mosaic look. And it's everywhere you go in the city, so much so that the Apple Store has integrated it into its marketing. Passage de Gracia also has these amazing buildings. They're like peacocks. Each building is trying to outdo the next, but none does it like Gaudi's Casa Patillo. It's an absolutely phenomenal building, and we didn't have tickets. We wanted to go inside, but we were also on a timetable. We did have tickets to Park Güell. We had to get there at a certain time. And what ended up being an hour-long walk with the last 15 minutes being entirely uphill, we'd finally made it. Park Güell is beautiful, and we actually made our way through the back first. So we worked from the back and worked forwards. The back has this beautiful terrace with these stone geysers creating this archway that looks like some sort of wizard created this rolling tide of stone that just washes over you. And the park is very in tune to nature. It's very peaceful and serene gardens compete with the architecture for attention, and everything. It's not really competing against each other so much as it's working together. The nature is worked into the architecture and it's growing from it. And we worked our way down and from the garden into the terrace with the famous serpentine mosaic bench with these beautiful sweeping views of the city, and you can see the entrance pavilions as well. But what I noticed immediately offhand with these benches were the gutters and the scupper system. So normally we try to hide those things as architects, but these were celebrated. The gutter system was beautifully mosaiced and is as beautiful as the bench itself. And you walk down the grand stair, and Gaudi was a genius. He could take an element like a mosaic tile and be completely deconstructive with it. So the way I saw it, there's two ways of being deconstructive. He either took the mosaic and broke it and made something new, like these serpent sculptures, or he took it, broke it apart, and put it back together and molded it into the way he wanted to look. So you've got this mosaic tile that was shattered and put back together on a curved surface to make whole again, to complete the aesthetic that he wanted to have. And the entrance pavilions, just at the bottom of the steps, are made from the same stone that we saw earlier at the terraces. And again, it just looks like somebody raised this from the earth and then crowned it with a mosaic crown. Sorry. It's an absolutely phenomenal space, and Gaudi was ahead of his time, and it will also never see anything like this again. But the spire of the gift shop is masterful. The mosaics are beautiful, and I'm speechless thinking about it now. But everything has a place. It doesn't seem over the top. It's a lot, sure, but it doesn't seem out of place. Everything works together. Everything has a purpose. And then you make your way to the interior of these spaces, and it's much more simple, much more stripped down. It's plaster and lath, and think, yeah, sure, that's nothing. It's a very simple material, and we don't even use it anymore for gypsum. But the way Gaudi used it was to express the structure or to emphasize light coming through the windows. And so you can see these two depictions here. He's got the plaster and lath running directly under the joists and expressing the structure in a beautiful way, or in the other case, vaulting it around a window and making the light bounce off of it. It's phenomenal. I found myself walking through these spaces with my hand outstretched, just walking and feeling the imperfections of the plaster. And I also love the color. That lavender indigo color is amazing. Later that afternoon, I checked out the Castelliers. The Castelliers have festivals every Saturday or Sunday, and just the way it lined up with my trip, I actually didn't get to go to one of these great festivals where they do the street performances, but I was in contact with them. They did allow me to come visit their practice. And before we get too deep into it, we should probably go over a little vocabulary. So the faia, the sash that this gentleman's putting on here, has two purposes. One, it supports the lower back, so when you've got someone climbing on top of you or standing on your shoulders, you've got some back support. And two, it serves as handholds for the people who are actually doing the climbing. The pina is the base of the base of the structure. It has the most people, and the trunk is the thin vertical element. And the Castelliers' headquarters is in this 3-story gym space with a bar at the mezzanine, and they were practicing small towers. They were doing single-person towers while I was there, and they were using a safety net. And I was talking to one of the Castelliers, and they informed me that this is the only time they use safety nets because of the pina they normally use that would catch their fall. So One crazy thing is that at the very top, these are kids climbing to the top, and they're a little older than my son, maybe. And I'm not too sure I'd let Walker do that, but they were brave. They had no fear. The next day, we set out to the Barcelona Pavilion. It is a beautiful modern work of architecture. I would be remiss if I wasn't studying God in the details if I didn't see a work of architecture by the person who coined the phrase. The Barcelona Pavilion was designed by Mies van der Rohe for the 1929 World's Fair and was obviously demolished after its completion, but it was reconstructed in 1986 using drawings and photographs. Now, the pavilion is, in contrast to everything we've seen so far, it's completely lacking ornamentation. It's nothing but form, except for this one sculptural piece that is in this at the very end. And the way it's placed in this in the corner on top of this reflecting pool, next to this beautiful reflective marble, you can see it from pretty much anywhere in the pavilion. And then every time you see it, it's a different framed shot, and you get a different emotional experience. And on the surface, the Barcelona Pavilion looks like this perfectly straight work of architecture, but on closer inspection, joints don't quite line up. Things look a little messy, like this column topping, and the flooring panels and the wall panels aren't exactly the same size, so they miss by about a centimeter or so. We're nearing the end of our time in Barcelona. Again, so I'm going to talk about the food. As I said, we spent a lot of time in the Boqueria. We had some delicious paella. I mean, you can do a grab-and-go empanada. It's an amazing place to eat, and it never disappointed. There was also this restaurant we tried one evening where it's kind of like a buffet. You come in and you grab a tapa, and you just keep grabbing as many as you want, and at the end of it, they count your toothpicks, and that's how they know what you've had. The best meal we had in Barcelona, though, was at a restaurant called El Zampinet. We actually met another American while we were doing laundry on our first day in Barcelona, and he said, "You've got to go to this restaurant. You absolutely have to. I go there every time I'm here, and it's amazing. But get there early, because if you get there after the shutters open at 7, then you'll get in at like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. You'll never make it because it'll have a line out the door." He wasn't wrong. We got there at 7, and we were fortunately the last couple they let in. We ended up sharing a table with this couple from Denmark. Mike and Jete were great companions for the evening. They were celebrating their completion of their military service in Denmark, and this is the one restaurant where we didn't take pictures of our food because we didn't want to be rude to our guests. And as opposed to normal restaurants where you tell them, I want this dish or that dish, the waitress came over and said, "Well, what do you not like? What foods do you not want to have?" And so for me, anchovies and olives, I can't stand them. But she ended up bringing out dish after dish after dish. We had stuffed peppers, steak skewers, tuna bellies, shrimps, cheeses stuffed with peppers. It was phenomenal and an amazing experience with some new friends. And now, Sagrada Familia, our last stop in Barcelona. It's Gaudi's masterpiece, and I really think it exemplifies God in the details. We entered Sagrada Familia through the Nativity facade. This was completed in 1930 and depicts the scene of Jesus' birth. This is the scene that Gaudi worked on the most. He died in 1926. He knew he would not see this church completed, but he wanted this facade to set the benchmark for everything else. It's masterfully crafted. Every piece of the facade is a work of art. You've got beautiful sculptures and scenes of nature, and again, comparing the entrances to each of these cathedrals, this door was like an ivy or a tree with these little bugs worked into the bronze door. It was an amazing place. And then you think that's great, and then you get inside and you see this massive space that again dwarfs you in size, and you've got the colors of natural light shining in through these stained glass windows. I was told I needed to come back multiple times, but that was unfortunately unable to happen. We were there in the afternoon, so we saw a lot of the afternoon western light just splashing through the space. And it's coming through these amazing stained glass windows, and you've got every color in the rainbow just shining through the facility: reds, yellows, orange, blues, greens. I was speechless. And then, compare this space with, again, St. Peter's Basilica, and yeah, it dwarfs you in scale, and that's about where the similarities end. St. Peter's, as we stated, was very formal, very institutional. This is a work of art. This is something totally different. And again, another holy door walking through, this time with words of the Eucharist, and you've got this this weird Sudoku puzzle set into the middle of the door, which each one of these numbers adds up to 33, which was the age of Jesus' death. And we come out to the Passion facade, and it's a far cry from what we had seen. Like the interior, where Gaudi expresses the structure through nature, through the trees, the tree-like columns, rather. This time, the structure is expressed by these bone-like columns, and it's very grim because the subject matter is grim. It depicts this the scene of Jesus' death, going all the way through his judgment of Pontius Pilate, through his crucifixion. And again, you've got this weird Sudoku puzzle of numbers kind of placed in the corner. And then finally, we made our way through the sanctuary that Gaudi actually got to complete. This is the one portion of the cathedral that was 100% complete before Gaudi died, and it was fabulous. They were doing the Hail Mary, so we sat in silence and listened to the Hail Mary in Catalan, and it was a great experience, and I think I'm a better person for it. And after that, we made our way through the basement, which is a bit of a museum itself. Like St. Peter's, again, you've got 4 separate architects working on a beautiful cathedral here, and the most modern of which are using 3D prints to plan their next phases, leveraging technology in a new way to make this beautiful work of art complete. I believe, if I'm correct, that this church is supposed to be complete in 2026, so it's almost there. It was at this point in the trip that we were supposed to change hotels again. We were supposed to hop on a train for an hour and a half and then take a €60 cab to this remote destination in the middle of the hills in Spain. We loved Barcelona so much that we decided to change our plans, and we didn't do that. So we spent our last full night just relaxing and enjoying the city. We went to the beach, hung out for a little bit, and again, I didn't get to share these beautiful moments where you're just walking down the street and you see a beautiful work of architecture, or you're watching kids play in a park that's literally in the middle of the street. It was an amazing trip, and I didn't want it to end, but it had to, because I had to come back to work, right, and share my experience with all of you. So, God is in the details. What did I learn? How can we experience God in the details? How can we bring that back to work? I'd say first, don't shy away from testing convention and experimenting with new forms. I go back to thinking about the Jubilee Church and how Richard Meyer stripped down your traditional basilica and rebuilt it with the most simple forms you could think of. Understand the intended use of the space, and the fact that intended use may change. For instance, the Vatican Museum, where it was originally meant to be the housing area for the Pope, had turned museum. Study building technology and push materials to their maximum potential. This is what Gaudi taught me. Talk to your building reps, talk to whoever you need to, and work with the contractor to maximize the potential of each material you're using. And finally, use natural light and use materials and forms that manipulate it to enhance your space. Again, Gaudi. Think Sagrada Familia, think Park Güell. Find ways to manipulate natural light and to make it work for you. And that's it. I'm looking forward to reading your applications, and I look forward to seeing next year's winner. Thank you.